Joe Furla, we are live. What's up, dude?
How are you doing today, Stetson?
Pretty good, pretty good. I know we have a few people like Alexander Jordan that checked in, said waiting for a Stetsinator. We are indeed live. Welcome, folks. Today we're talking about automation and why it's needed. This is a session where you can participate. And I have another stream going. Oh my goodness. I might not be able to hear, but we'll go a quick. We'll do a quick intro. Joe, why don't you introduce yourself while I figure out where my live stream is playing?
Nice. Well, my name is Joe Furla. I'm one of the head nerds here at Enable. Primarily, I support the Insight RMM, as well as operational efficiency, Mac, Cloud Commander, analytics, and then our satellite tools like Passportal, Take Control, Mail Assure, MSP Manager, and the like. So kind of the generalist on the nerd team, if you will. And then you'll very often find me, at least within the head nerd world, working with Stephanie and Lewis and Eric and Mark Andre, be it on automation or security or backup and recovery or anything along those lines. So Eric Harless, if you folks are familiar, is our backup head nerd. He now lovingly calls me the proxy nerd, as I tend to do a lot for the team.
Yeah, good deal. I am back. I had the YouTube stream playing in like 3 different tabs, so I couldn't speak without confusing myself. But anyway, my name's Stetson, founder of This Is an IT Support Group. We do these events about once a month or so with Enable. And of course, we are going to be chatting with Joe about what to automate and automation and why it's needed. All these things, very, very broad kind of topic. Make sure you're on our newsletter to get alerts when these things happen. But Joe, where should we start with this? I know a lot of folks that are probably joining in are either running an MSP, working in an MSP, or working in an internal IT organization. So perhaps, is it like what to automate? Should we start there, or what's a good jumping off point here?
I think even though we may already know it, right, and it may be something we as internal IT technician staff or engineering staff or operations or MSPs already know, but it's like, why do we automate? And a lot of what I do comes from the MSP space. So when I talk a lot about automation, right, what I'm really boiling down to when I automate comes into resource saving and revenue. Right? The more I can automate, the more I'm freeing up my engineers' time to work on bigger projects, to work on more complex tickets, to work on more automation, for Pete's sakes. And what that's really doing is saving you on your fully burdened per hour labor cost, right? The end game is to provide consistent and scalable and repeatable customer service, which in the end is going to increase your revenue. But with an internal IT department, that doesn't really translate, right? As a service operations manager or an internal IT support manager, right? Are we really focused on revenue for the company? And yeah, to a certain point we are, but internal IT, when I hear, when I say something like revenue or resources, right? What you should be hearing is technician time, right? I don't want my tier 1 techs always having to run maintenance or always having to patch, right? That's tedious. It's boring. It's going to get them into a rut, right? When I can free up resources for them, I can put that internal resource who likes to automate into a world of automate my maintenance, man, or look at taking that resource that loves to work on hardware, right? We need to update our server. We haven't been able to do it in the past 2 years because X amount of things takes up too much of our time, right? But if I'm able to automate this engineer's day by 10, 15, 20%, right? Great. You can go update my server now, right? You can bring me to the modern world with that database server, right? Or work at moving our Active Directory into the cloud, right? To Microsoft ID or something along those lines. So even though I speak a lot from the MSP side of the house. Or internal IT shouldn't let this go either, especially since I found internal IT, the larger the teams get, the harder it is for them to stay modern, right? Since we last talked, Stetson, I went to a couple internal IT conferences, and there were certain things on the security side of the house that just scared me, right? Like I tried to figure out how many internal
Tell me
IT
more.
departments were patching weekly, right? I got no hands raised, right? I was lucky to get a hand raised with internal IT departments that were patching once a month, right? And I look at what an RMM or what an MDM tool can provide with that patching automation, right? And that's a necessity. On average, vulnerabilities are exploited within 15 days of publishing, right? I can't patch once a month anymore, right? I've got to beat that average. And the way to do that is automation, right? If it's 10 devices or 100 or 1,000 or 5,000, right? You've got to automate this. So I tend to think, why are we automating? It's to ensure our end users are given productivity and peace of mind through the lens of cybersecurity, right? And the easiest way to make that consistent, scalable, and repeatable is to automate.
Totally. And is as Alex Jordan posted here, commented, internal IT can translate for a small team where people wear multiple hats. Automation can leave people more time to focus on their primary role. I think that's a great point. But also, Joe, is it like way too pedantic to kind of back out and define automation? I think people know what it is, but should we like have some kind of formal definition or guidance there?
Yeah, I actually think that's a good idea. So a lot of times when I'm talking to MSPs or internal IT departments, when I say automate a process, they're a lot of times thinking that they need 100% of that process automated, right? From point A to point B. When I talk about, say, for instance, automating patch, I don't expect you to automate the installation of all patches. That's not healthy, right? I don't want to patch drivers right when a patch comes out because I could break something, right? You look at, say, Microsoft patches that come out and may or may not blue screen of death devices, check past couple years. These aren't things that we want automated. I want certain patches automated in their entirety, critical updates, security updates, definition updates, but drivers, feature updates, roll-ups, upgrades, all that stuff, I'm not automating it. So when I say automate a process, it doesn't mean the entire process needs to be automated, but it needs steps in it needs to be automated, right?
Totally.
Now, there's certain things you can automate the vast majority of. Monthly maintenance on devices for MSPs, right? Go through your contracts, your statements of work, and your SOPs. 90% of your day-to-day, weekly, monthly maintenance should be automated, right? Nobody wants to go through every device, see how much space is left on a hard drive, and if it's less than, say, 10 or 15%, free up space, Yeah, and I think Alexander kind of hit something on the head here tangentially, right? When you're done banging the rocks together, build a machine that does the reload for you or keeps everything going, right? One of the things with automation, we talk about scalable and repeatable with it, but we didn't hit consistency, right? Humans are really good at trying to do things their own way, and that's not the SOP way. To get scalability in service delivery, you need consistency. Machines are really good at being told what to do, right? And they're going to do it the same way every time, which is a wonderful way to keep that fire not only going, but to keep it at the right temperature, at the right size, because I want this set of things to be happening around that, grill or fire pit or whatever you're looking at, right? So I do think that's a good call out there.
Totally. And there's a few points I think to expand on. Yeah, Alex, great point. When you're done banging rocks together and build a machine that drops sticks on the fire regularly to keep going, which made me think of Factorio. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that game, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Or for our viewers, if you're a gamer, check out Factorio. I seriously believe that like IT, engineers should play Factorio because it will make you a better engineer and help you to automate things. One other note that I want to touch on a little bit more, Joe. You mentioned things don't have to be fully automated in the beginning. And I think back to my career of some tasks that were maybe burdensome or toilsome or manual, which I think if you start to hear those words tedious, any of these mind-numbing processes that a human's doing, you should start to automate. But thinking back to some of those projects where we've just started to automate little pieces or perhaps build tools that help you, maybe it's something that converts text into some config format. Something that like is just a little tiny piece of the full thing. You don't have to go fully, push a button or scheduled and walk away. It can be partially automated, right?
Yeah, and one of my favorite examples I think people tend to forget about a lot, that I've been focusing on with any type of backup routine is we have to purge data. No way on God's green earth do I want to go through a SQL database and find everything that's older than X number of days, years, months with particular tags or data types in it, right? That should be automated. That's not all of my SQL maintenance. Am I going to trust something like PowerShell scripting for user access and maintenance to a SQL server? Probably not. And I don't quite think that's the best. And that's part of my maintenance. But dude, I can create a script that finds everything of X type of data set and gets rid of it if it's older than 7 years, right? Because I don't want to do that up to my own. And I think Alexander here with another comment hits it on the head, like where you talked about is automation doesn't happen overnight. When we talk about MSPs or internal IT departments, for that matter, that get the true gold star, best in class automation set, and we talk about how they've automated 70% of their service delivery, it's not like they woke up one day and said, all right, 70% of my service delivery is automated. I started on Monday. It's now Friday. I'm done, right? It is something that takes years. It takes a very long time, but it's never stagnant. You're never done automating, right? The general rule of thumb I have is you do something once, you're learning how to do it. The second time you're doing it, you're cementing it in stone and generating your rough draft of your SOP. The third time you do something, you're setting your SOP in place and you're automating it, right? If possible. There's always going to be things we can't automate. Where like the installation of QuickBooks desktop will never be automated. You got to have human.
Why is that? What's
you need
with
human
QuickBooks?
interaction, right?
Oh, I see.
Especially in today's day and age where things like CAPTCHAs and all of these security tools are getting smarter and smarter, right? Sure, I could automate going through a CAPTCHA, but it's going to know a machine's doing it, not a human, right? From the mouse jiggling to perfectly straight lines being taken. Like, there's just some stuff you're not going to automate or can't automate.
I have seen some pretty good CAPTCHA automation software. Is it reliable for the long term? I don't know. It could be a little janky, but it can be done.
Right, yeah, you've got to do like, there's like, 10 or 12 heuristics they look at, or behaviors they look at when you're going through a CAPTCHA. If you can mimic, I think it's like 5 of them, you could automate it. But CAPTCHA's smart. There's a reason they're so pervasive.
They're getting harder too, right?
Yep.
Way more difficult now. I get these ones like you rotate a 3D block or something. Insane. Well, cool. So yeah, I don't know that we have to convince anybody that they kind of should automate, but I think viewers would be curious. How could you perhaps measure the payoff of automating something? Is that something you've worked with clients on in the past, Joe?
Yeah. So when I look at payoffs of automation, there's a couple places I'm going to look. The easiest is just interviewing. I think since the last time we talked about automation, like, like 6 to 9 months ago, I've started talking a lot with MSPs more on KPIs. And one of the ones with MSPs and internal IT departments, for that matter, that have really dived into automation, they're seeing a huge uptick in is internal NPS score or Net Promoter Score, which is something a lot of people don't think we need internally. I really want to know how often you would recommend somebody to work at my company, right? My best hiring resource, wherever I'm at in the world, is always going to be a referral of a friend. And if I have techs that are getting happier because I'm automating, and typically that's what it's doing, if you're removing tedious from their plate, they're getting happier, right? That's a nice place to start. But then you can also look at other metrics, right? Ticket volume. The more you automate, the more your ticket volume is going to go down, right? You can look at mean time to resolution, right? The more you automate, the further mean time to resolution is going to go down. First time to resolution percentage, right? The more I automate and generate that consistency, even if it's between one department or another, or one client and another, because they're all seeing similar problems, right? My first time to fix percentage is going down. I'm going to see less recurring tickets once I've automated the solve of that Windows printer service stopping, once every 2 or 3 days, right? You see it fail once, stop the service, restart the service, go. See it fail 3 times in a row, remove it, reload it, start from fresh, right? So those are some pretty good places. And then sheerly technician output generation, right? At an MSP, it could be something like revenue we're measuring. It could be ticket volume for the individual support rep worked, right? Overall, as an organization, our volume should drop, right? But I should see my technicians being able to work more tickets, in a smaller fraction of time. So those are places I at least tend to start. But for MSPs, another really great place to look is, when do you hit your capacity as you're increasing volume, right? If I spend a year automating and I get to this point next year and I realize that I'm now able to grow 3 new clients of a similar size that I was last year and not have to hire a new tech, I know my automation's doing well. With an internal IT department, rather than client acquisition, it'd be end user growth, right? If it used to be every 250, 300 end users, I had to hire a new tech, and I've automated for a year. Now it looks like I'm at 350, 400. I know my automation's doing something well, right? And it's really hard to measure these because there's always going to be a external factor that still comes into this, right? And when you look at like the subjective, right, techs are happier. That's why I bring up the NPS score. NPS score is measurable, right? We as organizational leaders or directors or managers or techs can know this because we talk with these people every day, right? Alexander, sorry to pick on you. You're very vocal, so you're getting picked on, right? Dude, Alexander used to hate coming into work. I'd watch him walk in with like a 64-ounce Dunkin' Donuts coffee. It was gone by 8 a.m. He had the jitters. He was just stressed. We automated all of these processes over the year. Now Jordan or Alexander doesn't even need his coffee coming in, right? He sits down with a smile and just gets to work, right? But when I talk about internal NPS, I can track detractors, passives, and promoters as I'm going through my year. I can track ticket volume. Now, I can also track ticket volume to ticket type, right? Or track mean time to resolution by ticket type. If I've automated something in my password reset SOP, and I can show you over how the past 3 quarters, as that SOP gets adopted company-wide, that we've gone from 7.5 to 5 minutes per password reset on a ticket, right? I have those black and white metrics, those black and white numbers that prove automation is doing well. right? If I can show numbers of utilization rate being a very good one, the golden zone for utilization rate's 80%. Means on an 8-hour day, every employee should be working about 6.5 hours. We're going to leave an hour and a half there for restroom breaks, coffee breaks. Man, I just got off the phone with the most frustrating client of all time. I'm going outside for a cigarette break. I've got to figure out what's for dinner for the family break, right? If I'm over that 80%, there's typically two things in play. One, I have an unrealistic expectation of what utilization rate should be because I'm expecting me as a business owner to find employees like me, which is just never going to happen, right? Or I'm overworking my techs to get these tickets handled because I haven't automated everything, right? I'm putting them into a spot where they have to overwork to achieve realistic goals, right? So I love that objective versus subjective kind of conversation you bring up here, because the subjective, if we're in the process day to day, is where we're going to sit. But those are the points we need to bring up to leadership, up to the C-suite as these black and white items. And the subjective is a great place to start. Client retention is higher because look at this standardization, look at this KPI we're measuring, look at the NPS scores that we're measuring, right?
Totally.
Or, you know, employees are happier because our net employee retention has gone from 9.5 months to 12 months, 18 months, right?
Yeah, I think it's important too. When people hear these terms, KPIs, key performance indicator, and the NPS score, and everything, I think all that stuff is super important, obviously, for MSP owners, executives. But I'd give it as great advice for technicians as well, because this is like measurable. If you can measure the output or the money, resources, time, whatever it is that you saved, that's like definitely something you could throw on your resume as a bullet point. And also communicate to leadership. It's not as hand wavy of like you might have an automation that immediately you see value from, but it's also important to communicate that value to stakeholders, whoever it may be. I do want to point out, I feel like this is almost obligatory. Alexander said XKCD has a handy chart for payoff. If you're not familiar with XKCD, then first of all, what are you doing? But secondly, here's the chart. Great webcomic, been around many years, but it's called "Is It Worth the Time?" And it's this chart. Hopefully, this shows up pretty well. How long can you work on making a routine task more efficient before you're spending more time than you save across 5 years? So it talks about how often you do the task. 50 times a day, 5 a day, daily. Let's take for example, we're looking at something that we do daily for, let's say just 5 minutes. 5 minutes saves 6 days. If it takes even longer, right? If you shave off 30 minutes for a daily task, it saves 5 weeks. And I imagine a lot of these tasks are, maybe 5 times a day. So definitely, I'll recommend both XKCD and taking this to heart and maybe using this to guide some of your automation discussions at work.
I'll second the motion. If you don't read XKCD on a daily basis and you're in any type of STEM environment, you're wrong with your schedule.
Nice. Gatekeeping. I love it. Let's keep it up.
We'll gatekeep with XKCD.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what STEM field you're in. They have some of the best jokes. But one of the things to kind of build off what you were mentioning with KPIs and measuring, right? The mantra of you can't manage what you can't measure, I think, is a very real thing. But what I found as individual contributors or as management, especially those that have come from the large corporate environment, right? KPIs can get abused. Remember, it's not the KPI itself that's evil. KPIs are good. They're what we use as techs or as mid-tier or lower tier management to convince upper management we're correct, right? So don't think that me coming in and saying like, oh, you need to have this KPI is me intrinsically trying to overwork or force this motion that due to efficiency becomes overwork, right? That's why I focus on utilization rate. Utilization rate is the best KPI you're going to have. And I know this isn't an example from tech, but I used to manage a men's warehouse store. I used to sell suits. And I had a store where we were consistently in the top 5 in sales stats in the nation, right? Not volume, that goes to New York, San Fran, LA, that kind of deal. But my sales staff, percentage of multiple suits sold, percentage of shirts per transaction, shoes, underwear, socks, all of those little accoutrements that come with suits, my store had very, very high percentages. And I chalk that up to being in a IT world or retail world, where I kept my employees happy. If anybody got over that right around 80% utilization rate, I felt like I was doing something wrong as a manager, right? I would build into their day, all right, you just had one of the worst clients we've ever seen in here. I don't want to see you on the sales floor in the next 10 minutes. Because it's not worth it to me or my store, or you for that matter, to go in and try to sell again. You're just going to be pissed off selling to somebody. That's not a good look, right?
Joe, two quick things. One, I maybe have some words for the amount of money I've given to Men's Warehouse over the years for various weddings, or maybe questions about internal operations. But secondly, this concept of utilization rate, can we define that for folks a little bit so we're on the same page?
So what utilization rate is, it's going to be hours productive or hours worked over hours paid, right? So, you say you take a 40-hour work week, right? If we're looking to shoot for 80% on that, we're looking for that 32 ish hours worked per week. 36 hours worked per week range, right? Where we're trying to hit close to that 80%, right? 4 times 8 is 32, I think.
That's right.
So what we're doing is we're looking at how much revenue generating actions are being taken over how many hours am I paying for, right?
Well, and what's the other 20? Who's bolt time? What's the other 20%?
The other 20% is going to be I've got to go get a drink. I've got to talk to the wife about, or the partner about, what we're going to be doing for dinner. The kid's sick at school. I got to go pick him up right now, right? These emergency events that may take place where, somebody's still getting paid for a little bit of outside work. In tech support, I'm not going to have somebody clock out to go take their smoke break or go take their, I need to walk around the office for a minute break, right? It just never happens. So anything that isn't revenue generating would be that extra 20%. And I tend to focus on it as not just mental health and not just employee happiness, but things that we all have come up in our real world, right? In our real day. And it can go so far as being mandated, like I would do in Men's Warehouse, or I've done with some Enable folks. It could be something that you guys implement to kind of keep your ship moving as best as possible. The hard part to define isn't that 20%, it's the 80%, right? There's easy things to see. At an MSP, your tech's working on tickets 6.5 hours a day. Yeah, they hit 80% utilization rate. But where does continual learning fall in there, right? Where does automation fall into that? Where does SOP generation fall into that? And I tend to very much be a proponent of, as long as in the short term or the long term, it's going to benefit my revenue, I call it productive. I call it 80%. So a nice gray area example of this is if I have a tier 1 tech who is going through M365 training in Microsoft to get certifications, that is well within my productive hours. They're getting paid to generate me revenue in the future, because out of them, I'll get a tier 2 tech or a tier 3 tech that I can charge more for, right? If I'm doing continual learning on, Perl, okay, probably not revenue generating, probably not in the 80% there. It's continual learning, yes, but...
Is that because it's not Python?
Well, no, because who uses Perl nowadays?
That's what I mean. Yeah, ancient tech.
I don't even care that it's not Python. I
I'm
outside
kind
of
of trolling
ZipRecruiter,
because I'm a
nobody
Python
uses Perl.
fan. Yeah.
No, I'm not.
Fair.
I will say I'm picking on Perl here. One of my friends actually was a developer for ZipRecruiter, and he would pick on himself because he was like, "Dude, I'm the last person to code in Perl."
Oh, wow.
So, you have that fine line. The 80% is hard.
Sure.
Because it's that long-term look at generation of revenue, and it's also what skill set's necessary to get you to the next level of your organization or get you more value at the level you're at, right?
Yeah, and maybe a good segue. Is it segue or seg? I never know. Maybe a good jumping point from that tool conversation. Folks are probably wondering, like, what tools should they be using to automate some processes? It sounds like probably not Perl, but what's a good, I imagine it depends on the environment, but.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at like scripting languages or coding languages, right, you're really going to get, I would say, probably the big 5 or so, right? PowerShell, Python, Batch, VBS, Bash. You might see some Ruby in there. You might see some of the other shells like Z Shell or Shell in general. But I find in the Linux and Mac world, most people are Bash and Shell anyways. But those are kind of the languages I think you see most often. But tool set wise, there's a billion and one out there. It's what you want, right? I like BB Edit for Mac work. I like Visual Studio for Windows work. Not because one's better than the other. I think they all have pretty much the same feature set, all pretty much the same benefits and that kind of deal. But because I just like differentiation. I want to know, I have BB Edit open, I need to be thinking Bash. I have VBS open, I need to be thinking PowerShell. Then you have all of your tools like iMazing, which can help you build mobile config files for Mac devices so that you don't have to use Bash to create a profile. There's a billion and one PKG graphical interfaces. You have from ConnectWise, from Kaseyo, Autotask Datto, from Enable, from Ninja, from all of these other providers that GUI-based drag and drop interface where you can create scripts within it. At Enable, we call it the automation manager because that's what it is. Drag an object, go. Power Automate, speaking of drag and drop, may be one of your grooves. So the tool set, I think, is a little bit more towards you and your preference, right? It's the end game. You always hear that the ends don't justify the means, but in this case, I think the ends justify the means. If you're quicker here, do it. I won't ever argue with you, as long as you're comfortable and productive in that environment and forcing evolution. Right, the less you evolve in this kind of environment, the worse automation gets.
Totally. Yeah, so we've kind of covered, I think we've convinced people they should automate, and thrown out some tools. A lot of these tools are available free, right? Your Bash, Python, whatever it may be, PowerShell, Power Automate, which I embarrassingly have not used. But going from here, how should techs or MSP owners think about what to automate? Is this a case of like just write everything down in tickets and prioritize, or how do you identify, I guess, the most painful work or the most highest ROI work to automate?
Yeah, I think the best place for me to start, or at least what I did when I was running my MSP, and to kind of give some background on that, I ran an MSP of 325 devices. It was just me in the shop, and I ran it while I was a partner success manager at Enable. So when I say automation took the highest priority for me, it really did, because you can't work two jobs at once, especially MSP and PSM. So when I look at what I needed to automate, I started with my ticketing solution, and I took my top 10 tickets. If I can automate my top 10 tickets, I've automated a lot of my work. So that's where I'll always start, right? One, because those are a lot of time sink aggregated over time. Is a reset password a long ticket to take? No. Is a restart service because you can't print a time-consuming ticket? No. But when you have 100 of them, 1,000 of them, 2,000 of them, right, it really builds. And that's where your top 10 tickets tend to attack, right? The small time frame or small time necessitating items that are tedious, they're repetitive, get them out, get them gone. The next place I started was I took my top 10 worst offenders. We all have them. Now, here, some of the stuff you're not going to be able to automate, right? You know, I had a receptionist who used to call me on an almost weekly basis. I can't turn on my computer. Just look under the desk. Is it plugged in, please? You're not going to automate those tickets. But these worst offenders are going to have 3 to 5 to 6 tickets that you can automate. If I can get my top 10 out of the way and I can get my frequent flyers out of the way, that tends to be a great place to start. After that, once you've got that experience under your belt of how to automate these processes in a reactive fashion, you can start to branch into proactive automation, right? And what I mean by that's going to be self-healing, right? Take these reactive things you've automated from those tickets, apply a monitor or a check or whatever you call that information gathering action to that task. If this check comes back with this information, run this task, right? Then from there, you get into truly what I would call proactive maintenance, where now I'm going through my SOP, I'm going through my SOWs, I'm going over these contractual items, either to my end users or to my organization that I work for, that I'm going to be doing on a repetitive basis. Patch, disk cleanup, AD cleanup, SQL cleanup, you know, any of these items. And I'm just going to start to make it so they are automated. Right? Nobody should ever be checking manually to see if BitLocker's turned on a device and whether or not it's enabled or should be enabled, and then enabling it themselves, right? There should be a check and a task that does that, right? If it's disabled, I should have it enabled, run that automation. And I should probably pull the recovery key and store it somewhere for that matter, right? These, again, highly repetitive, highly tedious tasks that we look at doing are the ones that get us the most return. Once you get through that black and white contract, once you get through your top 10s, it very much becomes a mantra of, if I do it once, I'm learning. If I'm doing it twice, I'm documenting. If I'm doing it a third time, I'm automating it if possible, right? And there you're in the sweet spot of, dude, I can automate my day-to-day. Right, I can automate as much as I possibly can. So that tended to be the kind of trickle down that I took. If you want to start with maintenance first, knock yourselves out. Right, it's still highly time intensive, highly resource intensive actions that are being taken on a highly repetitive fashion. Right, that need to be done. You know, don't try and jump into automation with using Power Automate to automate the onboarding of a user in the Microsoft environment first. You know, start and grow it to a point where you could undertake a project like that.
Yeah, love it. And I've linked in the comments here what I believe to be a good Bible or guideline is the SRE book from Google, actually, that borrows a lot of definitions of this thing called toil. This is more, I guess, systems administrator side, but I think a lot of this applies here. There's a great quote at the top. It says, if a human operator needs to touch your system during normal operations, you have a bug. The definition of normal changes as your systems grow. I'd encourage folks, check that out. It just talks about toil, which is effectively this manual, low value work that oftentimes can be automated away. So we'll link that. What else, Joe? We've talked about why to automate, some of the gains, measuring KPIs, some of the tooling. Scrolling through my notes here.
One of the things I think that hinders automation is, and I still hear this to this day. So I'm not saying this was a thing of the past and it's gone, right? Where people might think it's like, oh, nobody can think that way anymore, is you never automate yourself out of a job. You automate yourself to a promotion. I'll say, if you don't, probably need to be looking at the organization you're a part of. I don't want to open up that can of worms, though. Neither the time nor the place, right? But don't shy away from automation because you think you're going to automate yourself out of a job. That just doesn't happen. If it does happen, right, that's a bit of a problem. So don't be afraid as a tier 1 tech to take some time. And don't take a lot of time, but take 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Just Google search it, right? Can I automate this? And if you can find a sample piece of PowerShell, right, bring it to leadership and go, look, I handled this thing X number of times over the past 8 weeks. Here's a piece of PowerShell. Can we give it to the engineers to automate it, right? Or automate it yourself, right? Don't take time away from the company. Can't really do that, right? Not doing your work will get you fired, right? But automating work shouldn't. So don't shy away from that. But that goes into leadership as well. Don't set up an environment where people are afraid to automate, right? You go back to that XKCD chart. If I can automate 5 minutes per tech per day across 15 techs for an entire year, I'm saving $5,000+ of fully burdened labor costs that I'm putting towards these folks, right? If I can automate 30 minutes a day, if I can automate 30 minutes a week for 5 technicians with a fully burdened labor cost of about $45 is a little bit over 5K. 5K is a new server. 5K is, a good trial in production of a new piece of software, right? If I can get that number up, I might be able to hire somebody new just because I automated my top 10 tickets, right? How many of us would like to be able to go and say, I need a new salesperson. How am I hiring them? Oh, revenue saved by automation, right? I need to spin up a new marketing initiative or motion. Oh, I saved 45K this year, 60K this year. That's new marketing, right? I need to find a security analyst because, good God, are they expensive, right? Automate, right? We can save that time. But I also talk about that because we need to incentivize it as organizational leaders, right? One of the coolest things I've ever seen at an MSP for incentivization is an MSP that worked exclusively with car dealerships in the Midwest. It was kind of an understood, if you worked for the MSP, you were some type of car aficionado. They did not have a monetary payout for automation. They had a quarterly payout of a BMW 5 Series because the company found that on average, when somebody wins most productive automation employee over the past quarter, they're typically 2 to 3 times higher than the cost of the insurance and the lease for that 5 Series. So if you got it for the quarter, you got the 5 Series and you got the parking spot up front, right? It costs the MSP money. Yes, it cost them revenue, but it wasn't just going, oh, you'll get $50 for every 10 minutes you automate, or $100 for every hour you automate, or whatever you decide there, right? Bragging rights to your coworkers is a huge incentive. At Enable, I love to use the example that in support, the top support person does get monetary incentive, yes, but they also get a 6.5-foot tall trophy that they can put right by their desk. And I tell you, if you walk into that pit, the person who has that trophy is chirping at everybody else, right? Oh, you told me to do this? Nuh-uh. See the trophy, right? Like it's always coming back, so that the incentivization doesn't have to be monetary. It can be something that is more physical, right? Get inventive with it. I'm not telling everybody to go lease a 5 Series, by the way. This guy got a better price because he worked on the dealership's IT, right?
Sure.
But think outside of the box when it comes to that incentivization, and it allows you to bring automation and documentation, for that matter, into your organization as a cultural thing. That way, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months down the line, your operations manager isn't hounding your engineers or your tier 3 techs or your tier 2 techs to automate something. They're just going to them at the end of the month and going, what'd you automate? Oh, this is wicked cool. How'd you find it? Oh, it was top 10 tickets. Great. Do you have a write-up for SOP? Already done. Do you have estimates as to time saving? Already done. Great. I move on to the next thing. I'll go present this up top, right? And it makes it run quicker. It makes it run smoother as you're building that kind of culture of evolution. It also sets you up really well for those that love playing with AI. And I know AI is like a splashy marketing term. Let's not go down that rabbit hole. But if I have somebody who loves messing with AI, the more I automate, the more they're going to be able to do with data analytics. And that just becomes wicked fun to play with, because that hits everywhere in your organization, not just tech, not just the IT side of the house, right? That hits sales and marketing. That hits everywhere, right? Especially as an MSP, I tell people, don't sell tech, sell revenue, right? I used to, when I was an MSP for my sales process, not even talk about the technology I owned. My sales pitch was around how in Q1, you paying me will pay back in your saved revenue or your generated revenue for me to be your MSP for the entire year, right? My sales pitch was, what are you doing with 3 extra quarters of additional revenue?
That's perfect.
Right? Go figure it
out. Yeah, lots to unpack there. Yeah, I think you really hit on this point well, Joe, on kind of the culture and incentives around automation. If your org doesn't currently value automation, I would, my advice, not legal advice, is get them to see the light or find somewhere else to work, because the payoffs can be immense. But
and on that note, if you need help with that, right, guys, you can find me on LinkedIn as Joe Furla. You can find me on Reddit as Head Nerd Joe. Just ping me, right? Yeah, you can email me, joseph.furla@enable.com. I have an ROI calculator for automation. If I automate X hours at Y fully burdened labor cost, I'm saving this revenue, right? And I'm happy to help you build arguments, right? So that when you go to talk about this, you're not talking about, oh, I'd love to cut out this ticket amount, right? I'm going into this argument with, I've already crunched the numbers. Here's this spreadsheet. Do you want to save 100K? No? All right. Well, I probably don't want to be here then, because I'm not getting a raise.
The numbers don't lie, certainly.
Right.
I love numbers, statistics, and being able to back up your argument, right? And that's a great way to do it. Joe, I know we're already at an hour somehow. I do think for a bingo card here, we should hit the AI point just a little bit. What are you seeing in the industry? Are folks using some of these AI tools, LLMs? Has it changed the world yet? What's going on in the MSP space?
So I think we're still a bit young for production with AI. But if we look at, or at least my supposition is how we're going to change the market with this, is like, if we all remember back to like 2005, 2010, where automation was the big boogeyman. Should I or should I not do it, right? Oh, I'm going to automate myself out of a job, or, oh, the machine's not going to listen to me and it's going to wreck everything in my environment, right? I tend to feel AI sitting there at this point. And right now, yes, we're correct. I don't want to let Copilot or ChatGPT or any of these other AI tools free inside my environment. I can use them to determine where I should be putting efforts, right? Like data analytics is a very real thing that AI is great at. So you look at something like a PSA with Halo, where they are AI backed, right? I'm not going to let that AI automate the resolution of my tier 1 tickets, but I sure am going to let it go through and analyze that ticket and pull out, oh, here's the past 20 tickets like this that you worked on. Here's the 20 different steps to resolution that were taken, right? I'll use that to automate, and I'll use that process for that piece of AI to go to a repository and say, oh yeah, and here's the script that you ran, right? Am I willing to turn over the reins to that AI yet? No, right? Are there MSPs out there that have for some stuff, right? But it's not to the point where I think we're both feet into the deep end. That being said, it's coming quickly. It's in the next 3 years, 5 years, right? Where I want to see an AI tool handling 80 or so % of our tier 1 ticket remediation as automation. Now, we go back to, does that mean there's no interaction with 80% of our tickets? Absolutely not. I want each ticket to be automated 80% with 20% human interaction. We still need oversight. We still need humans talking to humans, because let's be honest, we can all tell when AI is writing something. And our end users are still going to want the comfort of talking to somebody, not a computer. Right? Think about now with phone trees. How many of us get on a phone tree, hear the automated voice, and just goes 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0.
Immediately
Right?
smack it.
Yeah.
Immediately.
I'm to the point where, like, for instance, refilling my prescriptions at the pharmacy, I know I have to talk to somebody anyway. The AI can't solve it. I'm slamming that button, right? We all do the same thing. So are we to Skynet yet? No. Will we ever be Skynet? I hope to God not. And open AI sounds really scary. Narrow AIs are good. We can use them. The other thing too, especially with AI, and we look at large projects. For internal IT, this would be something like acquiring a separate organization. For MSPs, this would be acquiring a new customer. I love AI for going through with a tool like Qualys, or going through with a tool that's doing some type of vulnerability management, vulnerability discovery, both for the network and devices. And then I'll pump all that information into a database that can be looked at by AI, because I don't want my techs going through that. If I'm doing onboarding well, I have my top techs. It's too valuable of their time to parse out that information, and AI can do it in seconds and tell them where they need to be, because we can provide very precise parameters for this AI to look for, right? So a little bit of a long-winded answer there, but I think at least a good one nonetheless, right? Keep the AI on the leash, don't let it free, but use it.
Yeah, and I'd encourage people just to maybe keep up with some of the developments in AI, even if it's not fully here yet. One thing I've been kind of intrigued by is the I guess they call it agentic automation, where you hand an AI like basically a workstation, and it can click around and type things, submit forms, do all that type of thing. So I'm interested to see where it goes, but. Joe, I think we're just about up on our time here. Anything else we should cover on the topic of AI, or any folks in the audience, any questions, drop them in the chat here before we sign off.
Yeah, well, you guys are getting the questions in the chat. One of the ones I'll hit on, because you talked about the AI using a workstation, that made me think of is one of the better AI uses I've seen is let Chorus follow you and let it optimize your workflows. It's in Power Automate. It's escaping me now what section of it is. And I don't want to have to connect to a VPN to get to Power Automate because then I'll lose you guys. But there's this section in Power Automate that does workflow analyzation. It tells you where you can or cannot automate something. It tells you where you could be more effective using Power Automate to get this thing done. I love that.
Is it Flow Analytics?
I think it is.
Flow Analytics, or there's an AI builder as well.
Not the builder. You want the Flow Analytics.
Flow Analytics.
Right? You don't always have to listen to the AI, but at least you have something going through there that can analyze what you're doing in way quicker time than you can. Shove 20 or 30 SOPs and workflows into that AI. Take one suggestion out of it. It'll take you 15 minutes.
Yeah, now I'm interested. Right before we sign off here, is this what you're thinking of? Cloud flows, or that might be the wrong thing. No.
Bear with me 1 second. Let's see if I can sign into Power Automate real quick.
Yeah, let's give it a try. I'll Google on my end, and if folks have any questions again while we wrap up here, we will have a look. Going through some comments here. Lauren mentioned earlier, let the machines do the work. It's got some other resources in here. Of course, I mentioned the SRE handbook on eliminating toil.
It's the process mining section.
Process mining, okay.
Right, like going through, how are you invoicing? How are you going through your billing? How are you going through onboarding? How are you going through offboarding? You know, all of those items.
This thing, okay. Interesting. Yeah, folks, check that out. But otherwise, we're at just about an hour here. Joe, where can folks learn more about automation or Enable and some of its products that can help them automate?
So me.enable.com will bring you to a couple resources that we really like. The first is going to be our automation cookbook, which is about 850 scripts or so that you can pull from. Admittedly, a good amount of them are what are called automation manager policies. So you got to be with Enable to use them. But there is a metric ton of PowerShell, Bash, mobile config files, Python, VBS in there that you can use. It's free. You don't have to be an Enable partner. And then you have the enable.com/events page, which will let you find head nerd events, boot camps, or office hours, live conversations like this. While the boot camps aren't live, they're a pre-prescribed topic that we're going to go over. Office hours are led by the people there. And while, again, it is Enable, and a lot of the stuff you're going to see implementation-wise is going to be within our RMM or our backup solution or that kind of deal, you can take the PowerShell, you can take the theory, you can take the philosophy, and you can apply it. I've got a number of folks that have never touched an Enable product that come to our PowerShell classes, right? Because it's PowerShell. PowerShell's communicative, right? You know, it's really easy to see, add a check in Insight and convert that to whatever you're doing within ConnectWise, right? Or Ninja or Acronis or wherever you're sitting RMM-wise, even Intune, for Pete's sakes. You know, the knowledge is transferable. The software just might be a little bit different than what you're seeing. And then you'll have master classes as well. You'll find them on the events page. And these are specific to individual workflows, patching, right? Top 5 things you should be automating. You know, so those will be a bit more prescriptive to our tool set, but still things that you can take and run with and bring back to your environment. The nerds are not Enable hoarded, right? Or Enable walled in. We're very much along the lines of thinking healthy market, healthy vendor. And the more we can do to help the market, the better off we are.
Yeah, fantastic. And I have I can attest to these events that Enable puts on. Really great info, free as well, and some quality time to ask questions with folks that are kind of in the know. But I think we'll call it there. If folks want to check out enable.com/events, you can do so. Got one more comment from Anthony. I find that writing short scripts to do the things we need to do on our customer's PC saves a lot of time. I'll try and do this more. That's what it's all about. Anthony, if you're just checking in with us, this is recorded so you can go back and watch the beginning. Otherwise, Joe will drop your email one more time there. And thank you so much for coming on. See you on the next one.
All right. Bye. Thank you for having me, man. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, you as well. See ya.
Bye.